My girlfriend ignored me while I was dying, then cried at the hospital, but the truth left me speechless. The night started off so ordinary. It felt impossible to imagine how everything could unravel so quickly. Sarah and I were in the living room, her excitement radiating through the air as she picked out an outfit for Claire's birthday celebration. She held up a sleek black dress, spinning around with a playful grin. "Too much? Or perfect?" she asked, her eyes sparkling under the soft glow of the lamp. "It's Claire's birthday," I replied with a chuckle. "Go big or go home, right?" Sarah laughed, kissed me on the cheek, and hurried off to get ready. By 9 p.m., she was out the door, leaving a faint trail of her floral perfume in her wake. I barely had time to wave goodbye before she disappeared down the hallway. Alone at last, I sank into the couch with a deep sigh, grabbing the remote to browse Netflix. It was a rare luxury to have the apartment to myself. My plans were simple: order takeout, binge some YouTube, and maybe fall asleep to the soothing hum of a documentary. By 11 p.m., I was halfway through a video about deep-sea creatures when I felt the first twinge of pain. At first, it was mild, like a dull ache that could easily be ignored. I shifted in my seat, assuming I'd pulled a muscle or sat awkwardly for too long. But within minutes, the pain sharpened, blooming into something I couldn't dismiss. "Ugh," I groaned, clutching my lower abdomen. I tried to stand, thinking I could walk it off, but the pain intensified, dropping me back onto the couch. Panic started to creep in when I noticed a swelling in my groin. My hands trembled as I reached for my phone, suddenly aware that something was seriously wrong. My first instinct was to call Sarah. She was just 5 minutes away, and I trusted she'd drop everything if she knew I needed her. When she didn't pick up, I sent a quick text: "Please come home, I'm not feeling well." The response came almost immediately: "What's wrong?" Her reply was casual, even flippant, accompanied by an inappropriate emoji that sent a wave of frustration through me. This wasn't a joke. I called again. Declined. This time I texted back with urgency: "I need to go to the hospital urgently." Her reply was a single word: "Why?" At that moment, I realized I couldn't rely on her. The pain was too much. I was alone. I was lying on the floor now, beads of sweat dripping down my face as the pain racked my body. My phone slipped from my trembling fingers, landing just out of reach. Every small movement sent a fresh wave of agony coursing through me. Still, I managed to grab the phone and text Sarah again. "My testicles are swollen, and I'm in severe pain. Please come now." Her reply arrived seconds later, a series of laughing emojis. I stared at the screen, unable to process what I was seeing. Was she still joking? Did she think I was exaggerating? My vision blurred as another sharp pang made me curl up tighter. I called her again, the phone shaking in my hand. Declined. "If you call me again, I'll block you." Her next text read. For a moment, disbelief overtook the pain. My mind raced with questions. How could she not understand the urgency? Didn't 5 years together mean anything? Realizing she wasn't going to help, I dialed 911, my voice cracking as I explained my condition to the dispatcher. "Can you have someone drive you to the hospital?" they asked. "I thought so," I whispered, still clinging to the faint hope that Sarah might show up. "Okay, stay where you are. We'll send an ambulance," the dispatcher reassured me. Hanging up, I lay there waiting. The minutes dragged by, every second stretching into eternity. My stomach churned and nausea took hold. I barely made it to the waste bin before vomiting violently, leaving me gasping for air. 10 minutes passed, and still no sign of help. Not from the ambulance, not from Sarah. I clutched my phone again and sent her one last text. "Please, I need you. I don't know if I can wait." Her response was silence. The sound of sirens pierced through the silence, growing louder with every passing second. Relief washed over me as the red and blue lights painted the walls of my apartment. With great effort, I managed to pull myself to the door, using the edge of the couch for support. When the paramedics knocked, I barely had the strength to call out, "It's open." They rushed in, their calm professionalism immediately apparent. One of them, a woman with kind eyes and a steady voice, knelt beside me. "What's your name?" she asked. "Michael," I rasped. It's my groin. The pain's unbearable. She nodded, her hands already moving to check my vitals. The other paramedic started setting up a stretcher. We'll take care of you, Michael. Just hang in there. I could only nod, tears pooling in my eyes, not just from the pain, but from the mix of fear and isolation. They lifted me onto the stretcher with care, their movements practiced and precise. Any allergies? Pre-existing conditions? The man asked as they rolled me out to the ambulance. No, none, I managed. Inside the ambulance, the paramedic pressed something cold against my arm. We're giving you something for the pain. It'll take the edge off, she explained. The prick of the needle was nothing compared to the overwhelming relief that followed as the medication began to work. The pain dulled, though it was still there, throbbing in the background. As we sped through the city, I stared at the ceiling of the ambulance, the faint chatter of the paramedics fading in and out. My mind kept circling back to Sarah. Her dismissive texts, the laughing emojis, her refusal to come back. The paramedic caught my gaze. Someone meeting you at the hospital? She asked gently. I hesitated. No, I don't think so. Her brow furrowed, but she didn't press further. The ambulance jolted as we turned a sharp corner, and the thought struck me again. I was completely on my own. The emergency room was a flurry of activity, its fluorescent lights harsh against my throbbing headache. As the paramedics wheeled me in, nurses and doctors sprang into action. I felt a mixture of gratitude and vulnerability, completely at their mercy. A nurse with a no-nonsense demeanor leaned over me, snapping on a pair of gloves. Michael, we're going to check you out and run some tests. Can you describe the pain again? It's sharp, constant, my testicle. It's swollen, I stammered, wincing as even speaking seemed to aggravate the pain. She nodded, her face neutral but focused. We'll get you sorted. Hang tight. After transferring me to a hospital bed, a doctor joined the nurse. He introduced himself briefly and began examining me. His touch was careful but clinical as he assessed the swelling, his brow furrowing. I suspect testicular torsion, he said after a moment, speaking more to the nurse than to me. We'll confirm with an ultrasound, but we need to act quickly. Torsion? I asked, my voice trembling. It's when the spermatic cord twists, cutting off blood flow, he explained, his tone calm but serious. It's very painful and, if left untreated, can lead to loss of the testicle. The word loss hit me like a freight train. My chest tightened, and I struggled to steady my breathing. We're going to do everything we can, the doctor assured me, sensing my panic. But we need to move fast. Let's get the ultrasound team in here. Minutes later, the portable ultrasound machine arrived. The technician worked with precision, her screen showing images I didn't understand. The doctor watched intently, his lips pressed into a thin line. After what felt like an eternity, he looked at me. It's confirmed. We need to perform surgery immediately to untwist the cord and restore blood flow. Time is critical. The words barely registered as a nurse handed me a clipboard with consent forms. My hands shook as I signed, my mind racing. How had this escalated so quickly? As they prepped me for surgery, one question burned in the back of my mind. Why wasn't Sarah here? I was wheeled into the operating room, the bright lights above making my head spin. The team of surgeons surrounded me, their voices muffled behind the sterile masks and soft beeps of machines. They were moving efficiently, like they'd done this 1,000 times. But to me, it felt like my world was spiraling, completely out of my control. Michael, a nurse's voice cut through the haze, and I turned toward her. She smiled warmly, her eyes kind, but I could see the urgency in her movements. We're going to take care of you. You're in good hands. I barely nodded, my eyes falling shut as the anesthesia took hold. I didn't have the energy to fight it, nor did I want to. The pain, the confusion, the overwhelming sense of isolation, it all melted into nothingness. And then I was out. I woke up hours later, my body groggy and heavy. The room was dimly lit, and the soft hum of medical equipment surrounded me. My throat was dry, and I felt an overwhelming sense of emptiness. For a moment, I couldn't remember where I was or what had happened. Then the realization hit. I remembered the pain, the swelling, the desperation, and the one person I thought would be by my side. But she wasn't here. I shifted slightly, feeling the dull ache in my abdomen, the familiar sensation of stitches beneath the surface. A nurse appeared by my bedside, checking the floor and adjusting the monitors. "How are you feeling, Michael?" she asked gently. "Okay, I guess," I muttered, my voice weak. Did they fix it?" She nodded. "Yes, the surgery was successful. You're stable now." "Good," I whispered, feeling a strange mix of relief and dread. She checked my vitals one more time before leaving, and I was left alone in the quiet room. The emptiness seemed louder now, filling the space where I had expected Sarah's comforting presence. But still, she didn't come. I tried to swallow the frustration building in my chest, but it was hard to ignore. Why hadn't she shown up? It wasn't like her. Or maybe it was. The thought gnawed at me as I stared at the ceiling. I had no answers, just the hollow echo of her silence. I don't know how much time passed after I woke up. The hours seemed to blend together, long stretches of silence broken only by the occasional nurse checking on me. My mind wandered, caught between the pain of my recovery and the unanswered questions gnawing at me. Was Sarah coming? Had she even realized what had happened? And then, just as I was drifting back into a light doze, the door creaked open. I turned my head slowly, half expecting it to be another nurse, but instead, there she was. Sarah. Her face was pale, her eyes red-rimmed, and she was holding a bouquet of flowers that looked out of place in the sterile, white room. She stepped inside cautiously, as if unsure of how to approach. Her footsteps were quiet, almost hesitant. I couldn't bring myself to speak right away. Part of me wanted to shout, to demand an explanation for why she hadn't been there when I needed her the most. Another part of me just wanted to hear her say something, anything, that would make me believe she truly cared. "Michael," her voice cracked when she spoke my name. She took a small step closer, then another, until she was standing at the side of my bed. Her hands trembled as she set the flowers down on the table beside me. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. I didn't realize how serious it was. I swallowed hard, trying to ignore the ache in my chest. "You thought I was joking?" The words came out before I could stop them, bitter and raw. She flinched like I'd slapped her. "I thought maybe you were just being dramatic. You know how I can be sometimes, always thinking everything's a bigger deal than it really is." But when I saw the mess at home, the vomit, the empty apartment, then I realized. Her voice trailed off as if she couldn't find the right words. I didn't say anything at first. My mind was still processing her explanation, her excuse. Was it really just a misunderstanding? A moment of poor judgment? "I'm sorry," she repeated, her voice quieter now, almost pleading. "I never meant to hurt you. I should have taken you seriously." I couldn't look at her anymore. The way she had brushed off my pain, the laughing emojis. I couldn't forget how it made me feel. The utter disregard, the dismissal of my suffering. It felt like a betrayal I wasn't sure I could move past. "So, what now?" I finally asked, my voice flat, drained of emotion. Sarah took a shaky breath, her hands clasping together as if she were trying to hold herself together. "I don't know. I know I messed up, but I love you, Michael. I don't want to lose you. I don't know if I can just forget what happened," I said, my words coming out slower now. The anger was fading, replaced by a deep, uncomfortable sadness. "You weren't there for me when I needed you." Her face crumpled, and I saw the first real signs of regret. "I'll do anything to make it right. I can't undo the past, but I can show you that I care." But the question still hung in the air. Was that enough? Was it enough to erase everything that had happened in those painful hours when I was alone, struggling, and ignored? The room felt suffocating as Sarah sat beside my bed, her hands wringing together nervously. She was talking, apologizing, explaining herself over and over. But the more she spoke, the less I felt like I could hear her. My thoughts were too loud. The questions, the doubts, they circled around me like a storm I couldn't escape. I don't know if I can trust you right now," I finally said, the words coming out in a whisper, but they hit like a hammer. She blinked, as if my words had physically struck her. Her lips trembled, but she didn't say anything at first. I could see the pain in her eyes, the guilt. But it didn't change the fact that she hadn't been there. "I know, Michael. I get it. You're right. I screwed up. I really screwed up. And I understand if you need space. But I need you to know that I never thought it was this bad. I thought you were exaggerating, being dramatic. And I hate myself for that. If I could go back and change it, I would in a heartbeat. I could feel the weight of her words, the sincerity behind them. But the truth was, it wasn't about whether she regretted it or not. It wasn't even about her being sorry. It was about me, about how I felt, about how she made me feel when I was at my lowest. You really thought I was faking it? I asked, my voice shaking now. When I was on the floor, unable to move, in so much pain I could barely breathe. You thought I was joking? Her face crumbled, and tears began to fall freely from her eyes. I'm so sorry. I was stupid. I was so caught up in my own world, and I didn't think you could be serious. But when I saw the mess at home, and when I finally realized what was happening, Michael, I felt sick. I was terrified. Her sobs caught in her throat, and for a moment, I felt a pang of sympathy. She was hurting. I could see that. But there was something else too, a bitterness I couldn't shake. She hadn't been there when I needed her most. She hadn't taken me seriously. And that sting wouldn't just disappear because she cried. I know it doesn't fix anything, but I'll be here. I'll stay here for you, Michael. I'll make up for it. I swear. I closed my eyes for a moment, the weight of her words pressing down on me like a rock in my chest. The pain in my abdomen was nothing compared to the ache in my heart. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to say, it's okay, Sarah. I understand. Let's move past this. But I couldn't. I think I need some time, I finally said, opening my eyes to look at her. I need to figure this out. I don't know if I could just go back to normal after this. Her face fell even further, the color draining from her cheeks. She nodded slowly, clearly devastated by my words, but I saw the understanding there too. Okay, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I'll give you the space you need. But please know that I love you. I'm sorry for what I did. I'll wait for you if you want me to. I couldn't respond right away. Part of me wanted to hold her, to forgive her and pretend it hadn't happened. But another part of me, a quieter, more cautious voice, told me to stay strong, to not let her off the hook so easily. The trust we had built over the last 5 years felt like it had cracked, and I wasn't sure how to put it back together. For now, silence settled between us, and I knew that things had irrevocably changed. I just wasn't sure yet how it would all turn out. The days after that were a blur. Sarah didn't push for anything. She gave me the space I'd asked for, but that didn't make things easier. In fact, the silence between us felt like a heavy weight I couldn't shake off. The apartment that used to feel like home now seemed empty and foreign. Every corner, every room reminded me of that night, the night I was alone, in pain, and ignored. I spent most of my time in the living room, staring at the TV without really watching. The sound of Netflix or YouTube was just white noise, something to fill the emptiness. I couldn't sleep, couldn't focus. My mind kept going back to her texts, her refusal to come home, the laughing emojis that made my blood boil even now. But Sarah was still there, at least physically. She would come by to check on me, to bring me food, or just sit quietly in the corner, watching me like she was afraid to disturb me. Each time she spoke, I could hear the crack in her voice, the guilt, the fear of losing me. But every apology felt like it was coming from a place of desperation, not understanding. She didn't get why it hurt me so much. She didn't realize that it wasn't just about the night itself. It was about how she had treated me over the years. She sent me texts, too, little messages that tried to bridge the gap between us, but I wasn't ready to open up. I didn't want her pity. I didn't want her to fix it with flowers or sweet words. What I wanted was for her to see me. A couple of days after the surgery, Sarah came by again. This time, I could hear her in the kitchen, clattering around as she cooked something. The smell of garlic and onions filled the apartment, making my stomach growl. I hadn't eaten much since the hospital, but I couldn't find the appetite. The physical pain had faded, but the emotional ache still lingered, deep and persistent. She knocked on the living room door before entering. Hey, I made you some dinner. You haven't eaten much lately. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. She set the plate down on the coffee table in front of me, the steam still rising from the dish. Spaghetti with a side of garlic bread. It was a meal I would normally love, but tonight It felt like a chore. I'm sorry, Michael, she said softly, her voice almost hesitant, like she was treading carefully. I know I've messed up. I don't want to keep saying it, but I need you to know that I'm really sorry. I don't expect you to forgive me right away, but I don't know how else to fix this. I took a deep breath and pushed the plate aside without touching it. The hunger I felt wasn't physical. Sarah, I said, my voice quiet but steady, I don't know if you can fix this. I don't know if I can even move past it. You weren't there for me when I needed you most. You didn't take me seriously. And that hurts more than anything else. She flinched, her eyes filling with tears again. I know, she whispered. I know it was wrong. I don't even know why I acted that way. It wasn't because I didn't care. It's just, I didn't realize how serious it was until it was too late. But I'll spend the rest of my life proving that I can do better. Please don't give up on me. I rubbed my face, my hands feeling heavier by the second. I wanted to tell her that everything would be fine, that we would get through it, that we would come out stronger. But that was the thing. I wasn't sure anymore. I don't want to give up on us, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. But I don't know how to trust you right now. You ignored me when I was asking for help. And that's not something I can just forget. Sarah didn't say anything for a long time. The silence was thick, almost suffocating. Her hands were clenched tightly in her lap, and I could see how much she was holding back. Her face was pale, the weight of my words clearly sinking in. I'm not asking you to forget, she finally said, her voice small but steady. I'm asking you to let me try again. I'll show you that I can be the person you need. I need time. I need time to make it right. But that was the hardest part. Time. Could I really give it to her? Could I allow us to try again when the foundation we'd built seemed to have cracked, when my trust had been shattered? I'll think about it, I said quietly. But I can't promise anything. I watched her nod slowly, her face a mixture of relief and regret. And as she left, the apartment felt a little quieter, a little emptier, because I realized something then. Even though she was still physically here, we weren't. Not yet anyway. A week had passed since Sarah's apology, and the gap between us only seemed to widen. She was trying, I'll give her that, but it wasn't enough. The effort was there, but the connection, the closeness we once had felt like it had slipped through my fingers. The more she tried, the more I pulled away, unsure if it was because I wasn't ready to forgive her, or because I wasn't sure I could. She continued to check in on me, dropping by with food, sending me texts every day asking how I was feeling. Some days, I'd respond with one-word answers, just to acknowledge that I wasn't completely shutting her out. Other days, I'd ignore her messages altogether, retreating into the silence that had become my comfort zone. I couldn't help but notice the changes in myself, too. I wasn't angry anymore, not the way I had been right after the incident, but I was numb. There was a wall inside me now, a barrier I hadn't put up intentionally, but couldn't tear down. The love I had for her was still there, buried beneath the frustration and hurt, but it was harder to feel, harder to access. I was still healing physically, though the pain had subsided. The doctor said everything would be okay, but the emotional scars from what had happened, those didn't have a quick fix. One evening, Sarah stopped by with a bag of groceries. It had become a routine by now, her dropping off food, offering to cook, maybe watching TV together for a while. I could tell she was trying to hold on to the semblance of normal, but it felt forced. Every conversation, every interaction felt like we were walking on eggshells. Hey, she said, setting the bag on the counter and looking over at me. I was sitting on the couch, as usual, eyes glued to the screen, but not really watching anything. I had become an expert at tuning everything out. Hey, I replied, not turning to look at her. She lingered by the counter for a moment, probably waiting for me to say something, anything that would show I was still engaged. But I wasn't. I made spaghetti again, she offered hesitantly. I know it's your favorite. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I just stared at the TV, letting the silence between us fill the space. She didn't push, just stood there quietly. And for a moment, it felt like nothing had changed. But everything had. Finally, I sighed and looked over at her. Sarah, I don't think I can do this anymore. The words came out without warning, a slow burn that had been simmering inside me for days. She froze, her face going pale as if I'd slapped her. Her hands clenched into fists at her sides, and she took a shaky breath, clearly bracing herself for whatever I was going to say next. "I'm not saying it's your fault," I continued, struggling to find the right words. "But I don't know how to get back to where we were. I don't know how to trust you again." She took a step forward, her voice soft but strained. "I know it's hard, but I can prove to you that I'm still the person you fell in love with. I just need more time, Michael." Time. That word again. She needed more time. But what about me? What about my time, my feelings, my trust? I wasn't sure how much more I had left to give. "I don't know if I can keep waiting," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "I can't keep pretending like everything's okay." "It's not okay, Sarah." I watched as her face crumpled. I saw the tears welling up in her eyes, but I didn't move. I didn't reach out to comfort her. I couldn't. The distance between us wasn't just physical, it was emotional, and no amount of time or apologies was going to fix that. "I don't want to lose you," she whispered, her voice cracking. "But if you need space, I'll give it to you. I don't want this to be the end." And just like that, the weight of what I was saying hit me. This could be the end. The thought of it made my stomach twist, but I couldn't bring myself to take it back. I couldn't pretend everything was fine when it wasn't. "I don't know what I want right now," I admitted, feeling the truth of it settle deep inside me. "But I need some time to figure it out. I need to be alone." She nodded slowly, tears streaming down her face. "Okay, I'll give you that. I'll give you the space you need." With that, she left. I didn't watch her go. I didn't feel any sense of relief or closure. I just sat there, the silence louder than ever before, wondering if I'd made the right decision, or if I was pushing away the person I still loved more than anything. The days that followed were a blur. I felt like I was floating in some weird limbo between the life I used to know and the uncertain future I was now staring at. Sarah gave me the space I'd asked for, but I couldn't escape the nagging feeling that I was missing something. I missed her, of course, but I also missed the version of myself that didn't have to question everything. The guy who was sure about what he wanted, about who he trusted. That guy felt like a stranger now. I tried to keep busy, filling the void with work, Netflix, and late-night drives to nowhere. But nothing could drown out the thoughts that kept circling my mind. Sarah, our relationship, the night of my surgery, and the realization that I might never look at her the same way again. The trust that had taken years to build felt fragile now, shattered, and no amount of silence could put it back together. There were moments when I'd think of her, of the good times, the inside jokes, the plans we'd made for the future, and I'd feel a pang in my chest. I loved her, that much was still true, but the anger and disappointment kept getting in the way. It wasn't just the night of my surgery. It was all the little moments that added up. The times she'd brush me off, the times I'd felt like I was always the one putting in the effort while she took me for granted. The night in the hospital was just the tipping point. It was a Tuesday when I saw Sarah again. She'd been sending me messages, mostly apologies, asking if I was okay, offering to come by to talk. I hadn't responded, but I knew she was trying. I could tell she was hurting, but I couldn't bring myself to ease her pain. Not yet. She knocked on the door around 5 p.m., and I stood there for a moment, just staring at it. I didn't know what I was going to say. I didn't know if I could even face her. But eventually, I opened the door. Sarah stood there, looking small, like someone who had been through a storm. Her eyes were red again, her hair slightly messy, like she hadn't bothered to fix it before coming over. She held a cup of coffee in one hand and a small bag in the other. "Hey," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I brought you some coffee. I didn't know if you'd want it, but I thought it might help." I didn't know how to react. Part of me was glad she was there, but another part of me resented that she still thought this was a situation she could fix with coffee and gestures. "Thanks," I muttered, stepping aside so she could come in. She did, hesitantly, and I closed the door behind her. She set the coffee on the table in front of me and then took a seat on the couch. We sat in silence for a few moments, neither of us knowing where to start. She was looking at me like she was waiting for me to say something, but I didn't know what to say. What was there to say? Finally, Sarah broke the silence. "I know you need space, and I'm not here to push you. I just wanted to see you, to make sure you're okay." Her voice wavered slightly, like she was fighting to keep it together. "I'm okay," I said, even though I wasn't. The words felt hollow. She bit her lip, her fingers twitching nervously. I've been thinking a lot about what happened, about how I reacted, and I don't want to keep making excuses for myself. But I know I messed up. I should have been there. I should have listened. I wasn't there for you when you needed me most, and I hate myself for it. I didn't respond right away. I couldn't. I wasn't sure how to process it. The words were the same: apologies, regrets, promises to do better, but it all felt so repetitive. We'd been here before, in this same conversation. I had heard it all, and yet, something in me still wasn't convinced. She continued, her voice trembling slightly. I don't know how to make it right, but I want to try. I don't want to lose you. There it was again, the fear in her voice, the desperation. But this time, it didn't move me the way it once would have. I felt numb, like I was hearing her through a fog. Sarah, I don't know what to tell you anymore, I finally said, my voice quieter than I meant it to be. I don't know if I can just go back to how things were. It's not just about that night. It's about everything that led up to it. It's about me feeling like I was the one always trying, always reaching out, while you just expected it to be enough. Her eyes filled with tears again, but this time, I couldn't look away. I wasn't sure if I was being cruel, but I needed her to understand. I needed her to see how much her actions had affected me. I'm sorry, Michael, she whispered, wiping at her eyes. I know I didn't give you what you needed. I know I hurt you. And I'll keep saying sorry if that's what it takes, but I won't give up on you. I won't give up on us. I stood up then, my hands shaking as I ran them through my hair. I don't know if I can do this anymore, Sarah, I muttered. I just don't know if I can trust you again. I saw the realization on her face. The words I'd said hit her hard. Maybe they were too harsh, but they were true. She'd known how much trust meant to me, and yet she had let it slip away. I don't want you to leave, she said softly, her voice trembling. I'll wait for you, Michael. I'll wait as long as you need. But I wasn't sure I wanted her to wait. I wasn't sure I could give her the answer she wanted. Not yet. The next few days were the quietest they'd been in weeks. Sarah continued to text, continued to check in, but I didn't respond much. I felt like I was standing at a crossroads, and I couldn't move forward in either direction. My mind would bounce between the past and the present, between who Sarah had been and who she was now. But no matter how many times I replayed it, no matter how many times I asked myself what was really important, there was something I couldn't get past. One night I went for a drive, just to clear my head, the kind of drive where you end up miles away from home, only half realizing how far you've gone. I found myself on a long stretch of road, the streetlights blurring into one long streak as I sped past. My thoughts were a mess, swirling around Sarah, the night of the surgery, the trust that had been broken. And, honestly, the deeper I went into it, the more I realized I wasn't angry anymore. I was just lost. I couldn't ignore the fact that I still loved her. But what I felt was different now. It wasn't the pure, hopeful love of the beginning or the deep connection we'd had in high school. It was a quieter, uncertain kind of love, one that had been chipped away by too many unanswered questions, too many cracks in the foundation. By the time I got home, it was late. I parked my car and sat in the driveway for a moment, staring at the empty house. It had become so empty. Not just because Sarah wasn't there, but because it felt like we weren't there anymore either. I walked inside and found the note on the kitchen counter. It was from Sarah. She hadn't been here to drop it off, and that felt strange, too. The note was short. Just a few lines, written in her usual messy handwriting. Michael, I know you're not ready to make a decision yet, but I want you to know that I'm here whenever you are. I don't know what the future holds for us, but I'm willing to wait, and I'll respect whatever choice you make. Just please don't shut me out completely. I need you to know that I love you, and I'll always be here, no matter what. I stood there, holding the note, feeling that strange, suffocating mix of guilt and indecision again. I had asked for space, and she'd given it to me. But this note, this simple gesture, felt like a plea, like she was waiting for me to say the words that might somehow make everything right again. But it wasn't that simple. Not for me. Not anymore. I folded the note carefully and set it down on the counter, then turned and left the kitchen. It was getting late, and my exhaustion was starting to catch up with me. But I couldn't sleep, couldn't shut my mind off. The quiet in the house was deafening. And then, as if the universe was offering me one last chance to make a decision, My phone buzzed. It was a text from Sarah. "I'm coming over tomorrow, Michael. I just need to see you. If you're not ready to talk, that's okay. But I need to know where we stand. I can't keep going like this." I stared at the screen for a long time, reading the message over and over, the weight of her words sinking in. She needed to know. She needed an answer. And I realized then that I didn't need to keep dragging this out. I didn't need to keep living in this limbo, hoping for some magical resolution that wasn't coming. The truth was I had been trying to make things work when deep down I knew I couldn't. Not with the way things had unfolded. Not with the way she had acted that night. I took a deep breath, my chest tightening as I typed out a reply. I hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to say it, but then I just wrote what I knew needed to be said. "I think we need to end this, Sarah." I hit send before I could second-guess myself. It felt like a weight lifting off my chest and yet sinking deep into my stomach at the same time. There it was, the finality of it, the end of something I had spent years building. I leaned back against the wall, closing my eyes. The decision had been made. It wasn't easy, but it was clear. I couldn't keep holding on to something that had already started to slip away. And in that moment, I realized that the hardest part wasn't the ending. It was the space between the beginning and the end. The uncertainty, the hope, the longing for things to go back to how they once were. But sometimes you have to let go in order to heal. I didn't know what the future held, or if I'd ever find a way to trust anyone the same way again. But for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe again. The next few days felt like a blur. After sending that text, I sat in silence, letting the finality of it sink in. I kept telling myself it was the right decision, but part of me was still unsure. Did I really want to let go of everything Sarah and I had? Did I want to lose the future we'd planned, the life we'd started building? But as much as I tried to fight it, I knew the answer. The next morning, Sarah called. I saw her name pop up on my phone, and I almost didn't answer. Part of me wanted to leave it unanswered, to avoid the awkwardness, the pain of hearing her voice. But I knew it was coming. I knew we needed to have the conversation. "Michael," she said, her voice raw. "I saw your message." I took a deep breath, bracing myself. "Yeah, I think it's time we end things." I could hear the way her breath caught, the shock in her silence. "I don't understand," she said, her voice shaking. "We were good, Michael. We've been through so much together. I know I messed up, but you didn't give me a chance to fix it. Please, just let me talk to you." I wanted to let her. I wanted to listen, to hear her side of it all, to maybe find some way to piece it back together. But as she spoke, all I could think of was that night. The pain, the betrayal, the distance that had grown between us. It was too much. I didn't feel the same about her anymore. I couldn't ignore the fact that things had changed, that I couldn't trust her in the same way. "I'm sorry, Sarah," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I can't keep going like this. I can't pretend everything's okay when it's not. You didn't show up for me when I needed you, and that's something I can't forget." There was a long pause on the other end. I could hear her trying to control her breathing, trying to hold back the tears. It hurt to hear her like that, but I had to stay strong. "I understand," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't want to lose you, Michael, but if that's what you need, I'll respect it. I don't want to keep holding on if you don't feel the same way anymore." I closed my eyes, feeling a wave of guilt wash over me. I had been the one to pull away, to cut things off, but it felt like the only way forward. We'd both tried, but sometimes trying just isn't enough. "Take care of yourself, okay?" I said quietly. "I'll always care about you, Sarah, but I need to move on." "We both do." "I know," she whispered. "Goodbye, Michael." The call ended, and I sat there for a moment, staring at my phone. I felt a mix of relief and sadness. I hadn't expected it to feel this way, like an ending, but also like a beginning. There was no sudden weight lifting from my shoulders, no instant sense of freedom, just a quiet emptiness, a space I would have to fill with something new. I spent the next few days reflecting on everything, the good, the bad, and the painful. I thought about the times Sarah and I had laughed until we couldn't breathe, about the plans we'd made, about the future we'd both seen so clearly. But I also thought about the resentment, the distance, and the fact that I couldn't trust her the way I once had. I realized that sometimes the hardest thing to do isn't to stay, but to walk away. It wasn't easy. It wasn't something I wanted to do, but it was something I had to do. For me, for my peace of mind, for my future. Weeks passed. Slowly but surely I started to find my footing again. I threw myself into work, into taking care of myself, into doing things that made me feel like I was moving forward. There were moments when I thought of Sarah, when I'd see something that reminded me of her or hear a song we used to listen to together. But the pain didn't sting the same way anymore. It was still there, but it was duller now, like a memory fading in the rearview mirror. I never heard from Sarah again. At least, not in a way that made me feel like things were unresolved. A few weeks after our breakup, I ran into her at a coffee shop. She looked different, dressed in a way that seemed more her than the way she'd been the last few months of our relationship. Her hair was styled differently, and she had a smile on her face that didn't seem forced. She looked like she was moving on too. We spoke briefly, awkwardly at first, but then, strangely enough, with a sense of mutual understanding. We talked about the weather, about the things we'd been up to, and even shared a laugh about something from high school. "I'm really sorry, Michael," she said as we were about to part ways. "I hope you find happiness. You deserve it." "I hope you do too, Sarah," I said. And for the first time, it felt real. Like I meant it. That moment, that final interaction, was the closure I hadn't known I needed. I realized that letting go wasn't just about moving on from her. It was about moving on from the version of myself that had been stuck in that relationship for so long. I wasn't the same person anymore, but I was starting to find who I was outside of us. I didn't have all the answers. I didn't know what the future held. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe again. And that I knew was enough for now.